division called the Third Act, which is the brand content capability within Digitas. We're a global capability that sits around or sits next to media, creative, marketing, social, to really infuse content methodologies, storytelling, an investment in what we call audience design, kind of knowing where your audience is, how they're communicating, how they're sharing information before we start a plan. And we work across Digitas agencies both nationally and internationally, and my function is primarily an international role.
So it's basically all types of content.
It really is all types of content. I think that initially the Third Act was started as it was kind of the video group, and when a division or a brand was interested in a web series, they would come to the Third Act, and that certainly was, I think, the beginning of brand content. Well, is that how do I put my brand within a program or around a program? We're in the business of developing content really hand in hand with brands, and whether that's video content, and certainly web series and video are still a big part of what we do. That certainly bridges into platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, which bridges really video and social. But more and more we're working, I think, more with technology partners, specifically content distribution partners, and they're really helping us create and spawn ideas. Again, going back to the idea that it's hard to develop creative and content without knowing what your audience is doing and how they're going to be distributing it, because that's ultimately the business that we're in. The investment in content is I think, a developing methodology for brands, and it's, do we invest in and sometimes it's a zero sum of, do we invest in content or do we invest in our ads? And they really don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think that an example of a campaign that I worked on was with Delta Airlines and their Keep Climbing campaign, which is a campaign that's continuing to run throughout 2012, ran throughout 2011, which was, how does Delta build a better airline? How are they continuing to improve and innovate their service? And in a business that's very hard to change and improve and innovate within. You have 175 million customers over the course of the year. You have big pieces of machinery. It's a slow move, business to evolve. And so we looked at what's the right way for Delta outside of its paid placement and advertising to begin to have a real dialogue with consumers, and that became evaluating a series of content partners. And one of those content partners was TED, the TED conferences. And this was an initiative that started in 2011 that will continue through 2012. It's really an integrated program with TED, in that TED and Delta together asked the question, how do you improve the human-centric travel experience? And Delta and TED together are creating content. Delta's invested in on-site and TED conferences on their Facebook channel through a program called Ideas in Flight, in really helping to articulate and nuance the advertising message of Keep Climbing. And so content has been a way for them to, I think, to evolve and articulate that core message.
TED seems like an interesting example, because who actually owns that content?
Well, it is an interesting example because, and I think there's always the issue of kind of how much the brand needs to do and how much the content partner or co-creator can do. And I think in this, and there's always that kind of the ecosystem of what do you curate, what do you co-create, and what do you own all together. And so we had to be very, I think, intentional and specific with the things we could rely on TED to do and the things that we needed Delta to do outright. And so Delta is a syndicator of TED Talks and TED content. They're the official airline partner of TED. You can go on a Delta flight and watch TED Talks. You can go on Delta Facebook and watch TED Talks. TED provides us with a list of content that is very specific and special to the Delta brand message and to Delta as a company. The idea of Ideas in Flight, which is a campaign that Delta developed specifically on top of their partnership with TED, is something that Delta really has owned and created. And so that's been an interesting distinction for us, that how much can we rely on adjacency and a partnership like TED, and how much do we really need to own and create and push forward?
So with the Ideas in Flight, where is that content that's being created, and then where is it being pushed through?
It's content being created, so it's essentially it's a curation and syndication partnership with TED and that TED Talks inspire these bigger ideas around travel. And so the idea of asking the question, how do we improve travel? How do you keep climbing? How do you improve as an airline? Part of the reason to associate with TED was that we wanted to elevate the conversation right away. That it's so easy to start talking about, I want more food, I want more legroom, I want free beer on the flight. And we wanted consumers, and we wanted, and I think Delta wanted as a brand to be thinking about bigger issues related to travel. And that a TED Talk on human spatial alignment, on reaction to colors, on the way cities are constructed, all of these things could have an impact potentially on the travel industry. And so TED was a way to get into a different mode of thinking about improvement, a different mode of thinking about consumer suggestions. And that was really the point of partnering with TED. And it lives within, actually primarily it lives right now within Delta's Facebook page. So when we think about developing content, who are our bigger or distribution partners, or it sounds like what distribution elements do we employ? And I think a lot depends on where the idea for the campaign or the story originates. Oftentimes we are co-creating or partnering with a large media owner, whether that's a portal, or a news organization or a content organization, and oftentimes they will provide the primary method of distribution for that content. If it's something that we are developing alone or in conjunction with a production partner that may not have a distribution strategy, that's when we are reaching out to technology partners or entities, kind of non-traditional entities, or traditional entities as well, whether that's a video ad distribution network, whether that's someone like Outbrain, and that we had a lot of success at the agency with programs with American Express, an open forum, in embedding our content into channels where consumers are kind of already doing what we want them to do, already engaged in like content. So certainly there's a place for video ad network distribution, a place to push pre-roll, and a place for editorial integration. And I think they all have their kind of benefits and elements of I guess contribution to a campaign. So the right mix is really important. So we're talking attribution, and if the last click does indeed get all the credit, and where do brands make their investment? Is it top of funnel or directly to kind of performance media? And I think that it's always measuring or setting expectations for the clients that every campaign can't accomplish everything, and having very, very clear goals up front. And it can be, I think, harder for brands that have our traditional, more performance-driven metrics, direct response metrics, to begin thinking about content, and especially with new product launches or elements or times when they do need to be making that brand investment. That how do you back off and focus on content, storytelling, brand marketing versus a direct drive to sales, a direct drive to results. And so I think it's our job as marketers, as an agency, and as an industry to really educate around the right time for the right campaign and the right investment. And there are moments when you should be leveraging the hard sell and talking about price and talking about product attributes or functionality, and there's a time to talk about brand as well, and giving the full picture for a client is really most important.
What are some things you're excited about as we sort of approach the beginning of 2012?
I'm very excited about the number of content discovery engines that I'm seeing in market, and the way that I shouldn't call them content discovery engines. I think it's the new ways that consumers are discovering content, and it plays so heavily into a brand content capabilities business, into an agency's business, into a way the client is thinking about their consumers. Things like Pinterest and Percolate and the reemergence of Stumble Upon, and these brands and sites that are helping consumers discover, categorize, share content in new ways. It's just a huge impactor on our business. similarly to the way that just the advent of social media had on content, and that the reason to invest in content, I think, was largely driven by by social sharing platforms, and that people are not necessarily, are probably not going to share an ad. Maybe if it's the Darth Vader, Volkswagen ad, but more and more likely consumers are going to share a story that resonates with them, and that's what gets me so excited in the year to come, that these technologies and platforms that are really inspiring consumers to rapidly share information, and brands have an opportunity to contribute and take part in that.